Hi, this is Pete Lyons with Let's Play Salesforce, and in this Einstein Analytics video, we're going to be interviewing Chris Hopper, who's going to help us to understand a sorely misunderstood perspective and role in the ecosystem, and that is that of the recruiter. So, Chris, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, Pete. Thanks for having me today. Hi, all. My name is Chris Hopper. I am a Salesforce Technical Recruiter with Impera Staff out of Houston, Texas. A short bio about me. I've been around the CRM space for the last 2 decades, most importantly as a developer, an architect, an implementation manager, and a career counselor. Did that for about 16, 17 years with many major system integrators, and then was an independent consultant for about 7 of those years as well. And then over the last 3+ years, decided to move into the Salesforce ecosystem and focus strictly on the Salesforce technology space in order to help clients and candidates succeed in the Salesforce implementation work.
All right, so what is the value add of a recruiter as opposed to companies and candidates just connecting directly?
Good question, Pete. So the value that a recruiter should be able to play is understanding and having the good dialogue, be able to match the company, the industry, the skill sets that they are looking for with the candidate, right? And be able to broker that conversation, most specifically around salary negotiations, right? A lot of times that is a subject where you need a broker, for lack of a better term, to be able to handle that discussion, to be able to get you as a candidate the best salary that they can for you, and really being on your side in order to be able to do that. So the really main goal for a recruiter should be helping companies find the right talent out in the marketplace, as well as helping candidates find the right fit for what they're looking to do in their career aspirations.
Now, I understand that recruiting is an extremely competitive space. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, that's exactly right. I mean, I did not know how competitive the recruiting space was until I actually dived into it. There's 1,000 of us out there, a lot of them chasing the same either technologies or chasing all technologies. And so, if you go to any major metropolitan city, there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of recruiting and staffing companies out there. And so really what I learned is to be a specialist. And if you're a specialist and you live, breathe, eat, and sleep a particular technology, such as what I do for Salesforce, that is how you become industry known. Clients know who to turn to. You have a pretty good understanding about the technology as well as the candidates that are out there and what they do for a living. There's also a lot of recruiting shops that are offshore as well, outside of the U.S. and in Europe or in India, et cetera. And a lot of times I think candidates are also being approached by those offshore agencies that are also trying to help companies here in the U.S. find talent.
Do you tend to focus more on matching candidates with consulting positions or at customers directly?
Sure. It's usually a combination of both. My background had been consulting, and so that's really where I have a pretty strong network with consulting companies. Sometimes they need help either on a staff augmentation side. So if they're going to do a major project and they don't have the internal headcount that they need, they may leverage a staffing company to help them find a particular niche skill set, or just to bring an additional, kind of warm body into the project for 3, 6, 9 months, whatever it takes to help them in the staff augmentation space. But then there's also on the industry side where a company may have a SI, system integrator, in place for a period of time, and then they want to roll off the system integrator and bring in-house talent. So a lot of times I have companies reach out to me in order to find a resource to be able to come in and either do a contract or a contract to hire or full-time placement. As the SI rolls out, they start to build out their own internal workforce.
So would you say that in addition to how the roles that need to be filled are different, is there a difference in how you approach it and what you need to understand about the candidate?
Yeah, with the consulting space, companies are usually looking for those that have prior consulting experience. To me, and I highly advise anyone who hasn't been a consultant that at one point in their career to at least step into that space, for even if it's for a year or 2 years, to understand a little bit more about how consulting shops work, the amount of I don't know, stress or the amount of long hours, the amount of technology and different personalities you work with. I think it's just really a good career builder in order to do some level of consulting in your career. But in regards to consulting companies hiring me, they're usually looking for those that have been part of a consulting company somewhere else, because they know that the uplift to bring someone in isn't as deep, or isn't as doesn't need to be as much of a heavy lift for them versus someone just who doesn't come from a consulting background. And that's not always the case, but typically that's what I see. And then on the industry side, a lot of times companies are looking for someone who's well-rounded, who's been exposed to a lot of different things. And believe it or not, they're looking for individuals that have a previous consulting background to come in and be part of the organization. That's why I continue to stress when I talk to junior level talent a lot of times that they need, in my opinion, to at least play their hat for a little while in the consulting space, because either you continue to be a consultant or you can move into industry, and that transition is a little bit easier for you versus not following that particular career path.
And speaking of industry, when you're recruiting directly for customers, how does that verticalization impact what you're looking for in a candidate and how well they fit into that role?
Yeah, so a lot of times customers are looking for prior industry experience, right? And so if I'm looking, just for example, in Houston's huge in the oil and gas industry, and there's some financial service clients, manufacturing, things like that. And, they say, Chris, ideally, like a job description that you might read, some of the nice to haves, one of those being prior industry experience, right? Now, I can look at someone's profile and resume and see that they may not have worked directly in financial services, but especially if they're a consultant, right? Consultants, you may not have someone that just dealt with directly with financial services. They may have done a project for another type of industry, moved over to, maybe play 2 or 3 different other industries, but they're well-rounded enough that they can easily adapt to a financial service client, or for an oil and gas client, or for a pharmaceutical client, because they've been around and exposed to enough extra things, or that transition isn't so hard. But ideally, customers come to me and say, Chris, if you can find someone who's been into asset management, for example, that would be an easier transition for somebody to be able to come into an organization, because then they don't have to cross-train and learn the industry as challenging as it would be if they didn't have that prior experience.
I think this is actually a good spot to move back to what we were talking about with specialization. So how much of an impact do you think that has? Because I understand there's been a lot of transition in the market over the years as Salesforce has evolved. And, we switch back and forth between, is it a buyer's market, is it a seller's market? How can specialization versus generalization have an impact on a candidate's likelihood to find a position that's good for them? And, how's the balance between the resources that are available and the jobs that are in demand?
Right. So I'm a big fan of being a specialist. I just think that the industry and clients really want someone to be an expert in 1 or 2 major things. Right now, in addition to that, to have some good breadth around your overall soft skills and being able to interface well with the client, be able to understand what they're looking for, being able to be cost conscious, being able to deliver the solutions, all those kind of soft skills are still important. That's where the breadth comes into play. But when it's technology, having that deep understanding on whether it's CPQ or Einstein Analytics, or being a specialist around back-end Apex development, or front-end, with Lightning Web Components or the Aura framework, being and doing that type of work every day, and either learning new facets of what's coming in the seasonal releases around it, or to be able to have the community built around you, or you part of the community around those particular specialized areas. I think that's really where the industry is looking for someone to really come in to make the biggest impact to their organization. Especially, such TechArcs, for example. That the amount of demand right now in the TA space is huge, right? And there's not enough TAs to go around, and every customer is looking for, especially if they had a large Salesforce org, they're looking for a good, solid TA to help them integrate their Salesforce platform with other technologies, and the TA is the one that's really held accountable to help them see that long-term digital transformation vision.
So with how nuanced these skill sets can really be and the value that we see in specialization, how do you, as the recruiter, identify if a candidate and a role are really a good match?
Right. So usually having a conversation with a customer and talking a little bit more about what's going on in the organization and where they are really zoned in on and what they're looking for, that's kind of the preliminary conversation that I have with the customer. A lot of times the job descriptions are very generic, right? And so when they have 6 or 7 different bullet points all across the board as far as skill set, that doesn't really tell me much. That's when I reach out to the hiring manager and ask for 5 or 10 minutes of their time to understand a little bit more about exactly what they're trying to do, what would this individual be doing majority of their day, and then I try to marry that with what I see in a candidate's resume or LinkedIn profile, right? And so I can try to find out 80% of the time we'll be doing this. Hopefully I can find a resume that shows that 80% of their experience or their background is doing that. Then that's an easier match versus just being a very a general job description and a general resume. Then that doesn't really help me find a perfect match for what the customer is looking for.
So clearly you have a pretty deep knowledge of Salesforce, and this is really essential to your success and your effectiveness. How do you maintain that knowledge?
Great question. A couple of different things. One is I'm on Pluralsight, learning about the new technologies that are being published there. I actively read and write book reviews for those authors that are in the Salesforce ecosystem that are producing content from manuals. I'm reading and reviewing the seasonal release notes as well. For me, I come from a technical background, so learning about these new technologies and what's being released and Lightning Web Components and Apex development and all that stuff comes kind of second nature to me, so it's not that heavy of a lift for me to understand it. And then it's a way for me to also give back to the community, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of support out there in the Salesforce ecosystem, and there's already a lot of authors and those that are publishing content. And I like to also share what I learned, and I think doing the book reviews is a good way to do that. Me kind of taking a 200 or 250 page manual and being able to write a review within a 10 or 15 minute read for someone adds value for them to get a basic understanding about what the technology is all about, and then determine if they want to start to learn more about it. Kind of gives them a precursor to determining if that's a good way forward, right? I think there's so many different paths within Salesforce you can take, whether it's integration or development or being an admin or being a solution architect or a TA or Einstein Analytics, right? There's so many different avenues to take. My job as a recruiter is to help expose some of those and build my network of Salesforce professionals and say, hey, maybe if you're interested in this, here's something I wrote, take a look at it. If you're interested in that, here's something that I've shared or wrote or been a part of, maybe you want to look at that, right? And it's really, there's so much, I think, that a value that a good recruiter can do when they realize it's not all about them, it's all about trying to give value back to the community.
With this really solid foundation, it's probably really easy to spot when something's not quite right. And I'll tell you, I mean, I've seen my fair share of, how do we say, inflated resumes. But in a world where you can basically Google the answer to anything, what kind of strategies do you use to filter out the bad apples, and how often does this really happen?
I mean, in the contract space, it's horrible. I mean, it is just 8 out of 10 resumes that I receive in a given week will be exactly the same. I mean, there's so many of the keywords that are part of the resume. It's like, okay, writing Apex controllers and classes. And I'll see that in every project 17 times within a resume. And so that means nothing, right? And so when I talk to folks that are either in the industry or looking to get in the industry, all about being specific. Tell me exactly what was the problem that you solved, and what was the solution that you applied to it, right? And it doesn't have to be to the nth degree of detail, But talk to me a little bit more on the resume in regards to what exactly you built, right? And so to answer your question, whenever we have start the interview process, it's all about asking why and what did you do and what was the value that was added and what was the solution and what trouble did you run into and how did you get through those bottlenecks or how did you troubleshoot those errors. And if someone can't really explain that like off the tip of their tongue, then that tells me they weren't really involved with doing the work. I mean, to me, if you're just rolling off a project and you were there for 6 months, for example, and you can't tell me one issue you ran into that you resolved, something is amiss there, in my opinion. And so a lot of recruiters, I don't know if they know how to ask questions, but it's really just the how, where, why, and when, and just talk to me a little bit, just having a frank conversation with somebody. And, the good developers or the good Salesforce professionals have no problem doing that because it's something they just recently have done. It's sometimes where I get into fraudulent situation, or maybe they heard about it or they talked about it, but they actually didn't do it, right? They didn't resolve a problem or they didn't build a solution. They didn't actually write some Apex code or build a new, a Lightning component, things of that nature.
So, just to play fair though,
Sure.
I might hang out on LinkedIn sometimes, and I might occasionally get messaged by recruiters, and maybe we could talk about the bad ones. I mean, like, not most of the recruiters out there, but just probably most of the recruiters that message me, thinking I'm an Oracle integration specialist with 15 years of, like, do they even read my profile? I mean, it'd be really nice if they clicked on it first. Can we talk about that maybe? Because I feel like this is, like, what you're doing to me, it sounds like very well thought out and very structured, but that's not what I see sometimes. So maybe you can help to clear some of the disinformation around this.
Sure. I think recruiting is a lot like sales, where companies and sales leaders drive numbers and metrics and how many touches a recruiter will have in a given day, right? And so, and I don't know that for sure. I haven't worked in other organizations. I can just read between the lines to some extent. And so if a recruiter has a mandate to touch 30 candidates in a given day, they're probably just going in like the Wild Wild West and hitting up anybody who can spell Salesforce or just doesn't know enough about the difference between Microsoft and Oracle and Salesforce and some of these things that are just, if they just would spend 10 minutes researching it. Like, I don't know everything about everything either. And if someone comes to me and says, Chris, I need a specialist in X, Y, and Z, I'll spend 10 or 15 minutes researching it and doing a YouTube video or reading a blog about what exactly they're looking for, as well as trying to figure out some good interview questions to ask. But unfortunately, some recruiters don't take that same level of professionalism, or they don't feel like they need to, or maybe they just don't, maybe their upper management is telling them, don't worry about that, and I want to see numbers and how many people did you reach out to, and that's what's driving the conversation. Because I guess if they get 1 out of 30 candidates to respond in a receptive manner, that's their metrics that they had to hit. I don't have the great answer for that, Pete, about why it happens. I just know what I do, and I try to be as professional about it as possible. And even when I reach out to a candidate, I tell them, I'm humble about it. I'm just like, hey, Pete, I saw you had this position, or I saw you had this experience. I know that you are actively looking for new opportunities. I have a role here. I don't know if it's a perfect fit based on what I'm seeing and what you've done. I see some things that are the same, but not everything. What do you think? And I'll send them the job description even, or I'll send it, and I've kind of gotten some bad publicity about that. If they ask for the job description or ask who the customer is, a lot of that stuff, I'm an open book, right? And I'll be happy to share that information with you if that will help you feel like there's some trust and rapport being built. Because I think that's really the number one goal as a recruiter, is to build that trust and rapport. And, someone's career is probably number 2 or 3 of the most personal things that happens within someone's life. outside of maybe religion or family. And so, whatever I can do to help you understand where I'm coming from, I think that's one of the most essential things that can happen during the recruiting process.
So in the spirit of lightheartedness, do you got any other really good horror stories? Maybe about a candidate, maybe about a client? We'll keep the names private.
I just put a blog out today about 3 just haphazard situations I ran into. Now, this, again, happens more on the contract market than on the perm placement side. So one is I had someone last week, he called me and emailed me probably 4 or 5 times within a given week and saying, hey, Chris, I'm looking for a contract position. Do you have anything for me? Do you have anything for me? Do you have anything for me? I finally was able to line him up with a customer. Customer liked him, wanted a short 3-line summary about his overall experience, and then it took me days to get back in touch with him, and he would tell me that he would do it. He told me he would do it multiple times, and then finally he never produced it, and the client said, Chris, it's not worth our time or hassle. Let's move on. Then I had someone come in for an interview wearing a V-neck T-shirt for an interview. I'm like, are you kidding me? That makes no sense. This is not.
I swear that was not me.
This is a job.
I swear that was not me.
And so, I'm almost feel reluctant to have to tell someone to dress professionally to an interview. And a lot of times I ask the customer, right, what is your take? What are you looking for? Because if it was up to me, I would tell everybody to wear a suit and a tie and be in their best attire for an interview, because that's how I've always done it, and I advise everyone else to do it. And sometimes customers say, no, we're a little more business casual, just a sports coat, but to wear a V-neck shirt is like you have no inspiration or no desire to even have this position based on that alone. And then there's other mishaps with someone faking their resume or faking the interview or having someone else show up on their behalf. Every week or so I run into, and I think I've seen almost everything that can be thrown at me. Now on the perm side, and I mean that just seems like a lot more of an easier type of situation to work through. Even though I've had a couple of bad apples along the way with prior history of criminal activities that came out we do a background check after someone gets offered the position. If they accept, we do a background check, and we've had some things fall through the cracks then, and we picked it up on the background check and told the customer, full disclosure, here's what we found. Are you still interested? But I think that's just all part of the process. It's not 100% accurate, and you'll run into some situations that you wish you didn't run into, especially when a customer really likes somebody and wants to move forward with them, and something falls through, and the criminal background check shows up as something that was more than they wanted to deal with. So we end up having to let the candidate go in that situation.
From where I'm sitting, we do have a bit of a talent shortage on some of the more specialist things. We might have a little bit of saturation on more of the generalist. And while you have kind of given us this idea that, it's really crucial to be aware, it's really crucial to differentiate yourself. Is there any other generalized advice that you have for someone looking to break into the ecosystem for the first time, or possibly just looking to transition into something they haven't done yet?
Sure. So let's talk about those that are looking to transition. And I talk to newcomers quite often. I mean, I try to make myself available as much as I can, because I know everyone needs to get a start somewhere, right? And I look at it kind of when you finish up school or you're getting your first break in your career, regardless of what it was, right? And it took time, it took perseverance, it took networking, and it took daily routine, right? And I advise that whatever mentality you had then, take the same mentality for that now, right? When you're transitioning into Salesforce, because the more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it, right? And some people aren't necessarily big networkers and don't like to meet people just because they're more reserved or conservative or whatever the case may be, and that's fine. The one thing that Salesforce gives us is a platform to connect, right? Whether it's to communities or going to the Salesforce user groups or going to Dreamforce. I mean, there's plenty of opportunities there to network. And if you think about it, 80% of jobs are landed through your network, right? So recruiter, the space that we are playing is very small, right? And so I like just to work with folks because I was a career counselor with Accenture, and it was really helping to bring up younger talent, understanding a little bit more about consulting and how to kind of achieve success. So with those trying to break in, again, it's connecting with others and building a digital footprint. And that means writing blogs, writing some applications, right? Building some apps on Salesforce is all free, right? All the stuff that we're talking about is free. So you just got to be strategic about it. Think about some things that you want to produce and showcase those on your LinkedIn profile, for example. Write some blogs. And it takes time. You can't just do one day of work and expect it to overnight you'll be a success and land your first Salesforce career. It just doesn't work that way. There's a guy here in Houston who I met for coffee last February. He's looking to make a transition. He stuck with it. Everywhere I was, he was, as far as Salesforce user groups and the various community events. And then within, about 8 months, he finally got his first position, got his foot in the door, being a customer support rep on the Salesforce platform, right? Now, he may have to take a step back from where he was to where he's going, but it's also just getting your foot in the door and starting to get yourself on the journey to continue to have Salesforce success. Now, for those that are already in the market, more experienced folks, right now there's more demand than supply, so you're in good shape. I think the challenge is once you put yourself out there, you'll get bombarded with a bunch of garbage. And so what I advise is to pick out a handful of recruiters that you want to build a relationship with, right? And just say, if you're passively looking, hey, Chris, although you may not have anything for me right now, here's what I'm looking for. If you come across something, please let me know. And I have those conversations with folks day in and day out. But you have to do that with more than just me because my client pool is relatively small. So, but what I tell them is use my network, leverage me, right? I try to connect with Salesforce professionals daily, and there may be a company with a posting that I'm not directly hiring for, but maybe I'm connected to that hiring manager. And look in my network connections. If you see that I'm connected to the hiring manager, I'll be happy to do an introduction for you, right? Because it's all about connecting others, using your network, using me not just for a recruiter and getting you in a placement with one position. I mean, that's, the best case scenario because everyone's involved, but I'm also willing and able to help you look for other positions outside of my direct purview of what I'm directly recruiting for.
All right, Chris, I definitely want to thank you for coming on the channel, and certainly my eyes have been opened. And, I try to be the guy who knows what's going to be going down on my station, and even a lot of this is just really just new information to me and extremely insightful. So I definitely want to thank you because this is a role in the ecosystem that I think is largely misunderstood. And the more that we can understand about the people that we're working with to try and get into the, to get this all to work, I think that the better and more the more smooth it can be for everyone.
Sure. Thank you, Pete. Thanks for having me. I'm glad this conversation was very effective and informational for everyone that's involved in listening. And by the way, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.